It's the What Are You Driven By podcast, where we dive deep to see what motivates and drives our community's best leaders. Welcome back to the What Are You Driven By podcast, where we discover what drives our community's best leaders and how they engage their teams to achieve their potential. I'm your host, Diondra Filicetti, and the author of the book, Engagement Economics. I'm also a professional speaker and trainer. But today, I am joined by a special guest. I am joined by Amy Stevenson, who is a communications management professional, CMP, who currently leads internal communications for 300 employees across Ontario, where 80% of her team consists of deskless frontline staff. And so to keep a decentralized workforce connected and engaged, she hosts and produces her own podcast called The Living Room. So we're excited to hear more from Amy Stevenson. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be on here with you today.
Such a pleasure. So I did a quick bio of you, Amy, and I'd love to have you introduce yourself to our audience a little bit more and get deeper to get to know you.
Absolutely. I think, you covered a lot in the bio, which is fantastic. I think at the core, right, I'm a communicator. So I started my career way back as a wedding planner, event planner, and bringing communications into that. And then somehow found my way into the world of, not-for-profits. I started at a children's charity. I volunteer with a local animal shelter group. We're raising funds to build a new shelter in one of our communities, which has then led me to where I am now at Deafblind Ontario Services and into, this newer role of internal communications. I'm used to communicating or was used to communicating outwardly, with people in the community and outside of organizations. And now it's very internal and just learning that different way of communicating and talking to people, which has been really fun over the last almost 3 years now that I've been with this organization. So,
wow. Okay, so there's a lot there. There's a lot in your work history and your experience. And so this is really interesting. I've always been fascinated with the world of weddings. So if you don't mind, let's zoom into the past for a second. And if you could share a little bit about your experience and what that was like in the wedding planning world.
Absolutely. I think I was thinking about this not too long ago because it's been quite some time and trying to think of like how I got there in the first place. A little bit of a happy accident, I would probably say. When I finished college, I had sort of latched on to this idea of event planning. That was the piece that spoke to me through all my learning. I was like, that's what I want to do. And so was sort of working towards that and ended up working actually in the golf industry, working at golf courses. And, golf courses is host weddings, right? It's a little synonymous here in the GTA, right? So I started getting into that stream and sort of paying a little bit more attention to weddings, and then went, okay, this could be fun. And I think I've always had, those people skills where I think is such a huge part of that industry, right? You could be a fantastic planner on paper, but it's so many interpersonal people skills, right? You're dealing with couples, you're dealing with parents, you're dealing with, guests who come to weddings, and none of them are the same. Like every wedding was entirely different. And so that was one of the things I loved about it, as much as some of the pieces were the same, every week and whenever we were doing things, but the people changed and the people rotated all the time, which was really great. And I think the hardest part for me was always, when we would finish and my couples would go off and they'd go on their honeymoon and, you'd follow up by email and then, you're not talking to them anymore. Whereas, a month or 6 months, a year, 2 years for some of them ahead of time, you're talking all the time, right? And then you just kind of lose that connection. So that for me as a people person and a connector, that was always the hardest part, was like, sending my little wedded babies off to their lives. And then we never really, some of them I do, have on Facebook or LinkedIn and places like that. And so you kind of keep up and see, some people have had kids and things like that, which is really fun. But it was definitely a season of life, a very busy season of life. And you do end up, for lack of a better term, sort of married to that role as well, right? If you're actively doing stuff, it cuts down on some of your life as well, which is, sort of when I was like, okay, I think I need to slow down a little bit and think about these things, because it is also high stress, right? You're talking about the biggest day of people's lives, and So you get a little wedding planner burnout after a while too.
Oh, that's exactly, and that's exactly where my mind went. Like, this is a high stakes, high stress position to be in. This is arguably the most important day of people's lives. They're spending a lot of money and they want it to go right, just according to their dreams. And being the person responsible for that would definitely require a lot of problem solving and therefore a lot of communication. And so I can see how this position would have tested your communication skills and your ability to build those relationships to deliver on, dreams in this case.
Absolutely. That is the key part of it. And I think that for me, I feel like that was a part I did really well with that. I actually found this not that long ago, because everything still exists on the internet. You can find it if you really search for it. And where I used to work is still connected to a place where people can leave reviews about wedding venues and stuff. And it popped into my mind and I thought, I wonder if it's still on there. And so I looked, and it was actually really fun to go back and see some of the reviews from, this is going back to, oh goodness, I left there in 2015. So going back, like even ahead of that, and just, going back and reading those lovely words from people was really fun, and just reminded me of how much fun I had when I did it. And, grounding you in that thing of going, okay, you don't do that anymore, but those skills you've taken everywhere with you and sort of built on it into different phases, different roles and things like that. So it was really fun to go back and take a quick peek at it and relive some of those memories too.
Yeah, walk down memory lane. And so, knowing that you had strengths in communication, is that what sort of led you to where you are today in this position? Or what was it? What was that transition period? What did it look like for you?
I think so. When I was finishing that end of wedding planning and coming into this phase of, for so long that had been the dream and the thing that I wanted to do, and, you achieve it and then you become a little disenchanted with it, maybe when you get to that space and you're in that thinking of, okay, where do I want to go next? What I want to do. And it was around that time that I had started volunteering with the animal shelter group. I met a whole bunch of people from the community, right? Working for, learning about fundraising. I was never a fundraiser. I didn't know the first thing about that. I hadn't really done a lot of volunteering. I'd done a little bit in the wedding space. But this was my sort of big foray into volunteering and learning about non-for-profits. And we were scouting a venue for our gala coming up, and we were driving. There was a bunch of us in the car. And I remember saying, how do I get paid to do this? Like, this is so much fun. I love doing this. Like, is that even an option? Right? I didn't know at the time, which, through some conversations, with some people, and there was a person on our fundraising committee at that time who was in the communications field as well. And so I learned a lot from her at that time. And we talked about, what would this, maybe look like? And I ended up getting connected to the children's charity that I worked for a little while, a little into the event space, but then started to learn more about fundraising and donor communications and all of those things that nonprofits do. And so I think, like many in our nonprofit field, you're just sort of walking along one day and you kind of fall into it, right? It just kind of happens to you. In some of, like, there are courses and there are places you can go and learn about it and do it. But some of us, start in one field and end up in a totally different direction. So I absolutely credit that volunteer experience and just trying new things to moving me onto sort of this communication path and into this area.
And sometimes it's those unexpected turns in our career that lead us to somewhere where we would have never thought to put ourselves in the first place, but we're really grateful we ended up there anyway. So
absolutely.
Right? I think there's beauty in that. And the best part for you is that all those strengths in communication are something that you lean on today. And so I'd love to dig deeper into your experience and what your leadership role looks like, especially when 80% of your team is decentralized. And, this question comes up a lot in my work, because how do we engage teams that we never really see? So I'd love to know, maybe let's start with a challenge that you've had in your leadership. And maybe it's that, or maybe it's something else, but what would you say has been your greatest challenge?
I think in this role, I think, in your question there, you hit that nail on the head, is how do you take what you know about communications, and from the lens that I was coming from before, we were talking about donor communications and things like that. Like, obviously you're not with donors all the time, right? And so you communicate with them in a specific type of way. There's language and ways, and people communicate with a nonprofit different, but coming internally and figuring out, we have employees as far north as Sudbury, and then we go east to London, or west to London, east to Ottawa. So how do you bring them together, knowing that as far apart as they are, it's a shared purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our goals are the same. We are supporting people. So how do you bring that together, connect them together as people who are in the same space? I mean, I have my colleagues on my team. If I have a challenge, that's who I reach out to. How do you, from other locations go, someone's experiencing the same thing that I am, and connect them together to problem solve or come up with new ideas? And so I think coming into this role, for me, that was the challenge, is how do I connect with these people in a different way that also doesn't take away from the fact, again, they're supporting people. And so they don't always have the time to, sit down and read an email or tune into something. So how do we, provide these methods of communication that they can still get information about the organization and what's happening in ways that work for them, right? That's the challenge when you're dealing with, people who don't do the same as you do. I sit at a desk all day, and so it's different for me and different for them. So having those conversations and trying to get to the root of that and figure it out, I think when I started was probably the biggest challenge for me.
Okay. And so now we want to know how you overcame it, right? Like, how did you get to know all of these people? How much time did it take? Like, let us into the process of, from where you started to where you are today with your team.
Absolutely. I am very blessed to work with my colleague, Sarah. She's a little more completely focused on employee engagement from, other lenses, whereas mine is internal comms, but our roles are so closely connected together. So we collaborate on a lot of things. She'll have an idea, and, I'll come from the comms perspective, and we, figure that out. And I think when I started, we were just coming into this sort of technology revolution, if you want to call it that. When I was onboarding, people were coming into, we work in the Microsoft platform, so Teams and Viva Engage, and that was coming into play, right? They were introducing that, and the IT team was working with everybody. And to do that, everyone had to have an email address, an organization email address to get into this, Teams Microsoft environment. And so it was a little bit of change management, right? Thinking, and all the news you need is coming to one address, and getting people just to take that first step and log in, right? It didn't have to be on your phone, and people can, and some do, that we found out subsequently, but they could, each location has a computer, right? So the idea was you could log in as yourself and be in there and do that. And that was a big challenge. And our team, was really sort of coming into our own. There was some, myself, I was new, our director was new to our comms team at that point. And so just trying to figure out how we wanted to position this, and that why behind, like, why is it important for you to check in, and, going through and thinking about just all the communications we were sending. Like, what needs to come by email? What is better suited to a Viva Engage post? Now that we have the podcast, what is better suited for video and conversation, as opposed to, bombarding people's inboxes? Like, we all know what an inbox can be like. And if you're deskless and frontline most of the time, that can get overwhelming. Yeah. And so and that took probably, I would say, a good 9 months to a year just to get the strike. Like, some people adopted and it was great, but get the stragglers on, right? To, everything's coming here. All your training things are coming here. Your HR things are coming here, and reminding them that was sort of the centralized place to find it. But as you know, email is not it's very passive. It's not a two-way communication street. And so how do we try and engage people, with conversation and connect to each other? And so I would say Sarah and I've worked the last, year and a half to really push Viva Engage and getting people on there and sharing stories, the amazing things that are happening in the organization, the people we're supporting and the wins that they have, connecting with their community. That's been a goal of ours. And we're starting to see, it's that long game. We're starting to see that come to fruition now.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So there's a lot in there. And you mentioned, having to pull into the why when you were focused on the change management of introducing that new email. And I think this is an important point to think about, because when we think about any sorts of change in organizations, and things are changing so rapidly with new technology, with AI, with return to the workplace, all sorts of things, every day things are changing. And I think sometimes the why gets lost. We focus on, what is it that I have to say? What is it that I need to tell my team? And then we forget that if we introduce the why in there, then we can help them understand. We can ease that transition just a little bit, so it feels less like a command and more like, okay, this is an initiative that we're all doing, and here's the outcome. Here's the reason why. So I'm sure as a communications professional, that's something.
It's something that when we're thinking about these things, or again, we've worked so hard over the last 3 years to bring in other teams and groups and come to us first, and we'll have these conversations about those whys and answering that, right? Sometimes it's just, it was like, okay, well, we have to do this, and this, and check this box, and this box. And when you dig deeper into it, what do you want people to learn? We have this amazing set of certifications for our frontline staff, and they're trying to bump people up to start working towards these certifications and doing it. And so we really had to drill it back to, well, why is it important? Well, you know what? It grounds your practice and, all of these things and the why behind it, as opposed to, you should get your certification. Stop, right? And come into that piece, and then highlight what opportunities are available to you, right? So that people know, and it's not a one and done message. We have to keep repeating things in different ways, so that at whatever time in their journey, it's no different than marketing outside. What is that stat? People have to see something 7 times before they do something, right? So how do you do that internally without sounding like you're saying the same thing over and over and over again, right?
Exactly. It was funny. I was just thinking that when you were mentioning it, and it's almost as if communication, when, it's strategic in that sense, there's also this bit of psychology and human behavior that you have to consider, because it might feel one way to you, like, I feel like I'm being so repetitive, but for them, it's like, oh yeah, I needed that reminder, right? I needed that second touch point, or I needed to see it in a different way to understand it, right? And so without that consideration of how the message is being received, the psychology behind that, and also the human behavior on how they're receiving that information and how they're utilizing that information, I think communication could be incomplete without all that.
Absolutely. And you have to, you're right. Remember that, okay, I've seen this message 7 times, but maybe someone's just going to see it 1 time. And that's when we catch them. And then that's when they, take that step and book a one-on-one call with our leader of the department that manages the certifications, and has that conversation with them and says, yes, I want to move forward and I want to work on this. Or, we catch people at the time they need to see that information. So it may sound repetitive to us, and, as much as we try and change up the message, we have to keep repeating it. And we have new people coming into the organization all the time. It's not like we all start on January 1st, right? People come in and are new, and if we don't continuously talk about things, say they're over a calendar year and map that out, if we talk about it in January and someone starts in August, we don't hit them with this information, or they don't start to get to know this until, months and months later. So it's reminding people of that idea of, they always are, they're like, oh, Amy's coming with her big, calendar or communications thing. Like, we have to think about that. Like, what do you want to talk about over the year, and get them thinking from that lens and way of doing, as opposed to looking back on their own work plans and going, oh, we haven't talked about this, and it just goes out without any sort of preparedness and research and plan behind it. So it's definitely an interesting way for them to start thinking about it, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I'd love to, for those listening, and I think a lot of people can relate to your situation with having teams that are, in various geographical locations. And there's actually someone in particular who I knew who was struggling with engaging teams that were constantly on the road. And so, since you've been through that process, you yourself and your colleague, what advice would you give to those about engagement strategies in this situation that you're in?
Well, that's a good one. I think for us, one of the biggest things was sort of stepping back and listening. Right? Having those conversations. And Sarah, over the last 2 years, has been to all of our locations, has done some work in each region with our teams and talk to them. Whenever possible, we try and, if we're in the air, we try and, pop by a location and just talk to people, right? And say, here's what's coming out. Have you heard about this? Have you thought about doing X or coming to this thing or being on the podcast or whatever it is? And just getting their feedback and not getting in our own way of going, oh, well, we couldn't possibly communicate it this way, right? Hearing from them, like how they want to receive that information. Again, 300 people, it's all going to be different, but we can find some similarities in it, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes you have to not make it personal, right? And think if somebody goes, oh, well, I don't listen to this, or I didn't see this, or I whatever. And it feels a little personal at the beginning and going, okay, but everybody's working situation is different. So I think making that effort, for us and the other members of our team to just go and be present. We're not this, face of people behind the screen. Like we actually go out and see people and, connect with them in that way. Because you can't beat person to person. If we could just travel around all the time and spread our communications message, it would be great. But, we don't have the budget or the time for that. But as much as possible, it's just, putting on that listening, set of skills and just hearing what they're saying and how can we take a little nugget from that and try something or build on it. And, I've proposed things to our senior managers that they've gone, hey, that sounds great. That's a lot of money. It's not going to happen. Right. And go, okay, well, what else could we do? If we can't pay for something fancy or whatever, what else can we do within the means that we have? And just being a little bit creative too. I think it's a challenge. Anywhere to catch attention and get people when they need to get that information. So I would definitely say those two things. Listen and be willing to, pivot and try something new when, maybe you get that no from the higher up.
Yeah.
To do that.
It's funny. So, you mentioned the challenge of getting people's attention. And I think that is the challenge in this day and age. Like at home, trying to get the attention of your spouse or your children, and then online on social media through your marketing. We're in a world that has an attention deficit. And so communication is that much more important to make sure that we are listening and we are using these skills, because they really and truly are the solution here. And so when we forget to employ that, I think we're missing a big opportunity. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that and shared that, because I think that exercise of going to the different sites and really listening and then taking that and thinking, okay, what can I put into action here? I think that's the only way you get something that's personalized, that's going to work for the folks. That learning piece is so important before we create, before we communicate. It's the understanding piece. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I love that you grabbed onto that. It's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
I love it.
So what I'd like to do next is actually kind of step back a little bit and talk about like leadership characteristics as a whole, and your opinions on that, because a lot of the people who listen to the podcast are in leadership positions or are aspiring leaders. And so, in your position that, as again, is so unique, what would you consider to be the characteristics that you think every leader should have?
Oh, Wow.
Heavy question.
It is a heavy question, but I think that, like, when I think about, my own leadership in those types of roles, I think one is going back to that point from just previous, like, is being able to listen, right? And just, sometimes you're coming into a meeting and sometimes someone just needs to say, I need to tell you about this, this, and this, and you just need to sit there and listen. Like, what do they need from me in this conversation? Do they need my feedback? Do they need me to help problem solve and brainstorm? And I think what I've noticed, again, I work with so many teams within the organization, different departments, is getting to know those people and know when they come into those conversations going, okay, I know this is their challenge and I know this person really wants to, brainstorm something, right? And getting to that heart of that conversation, when you're meeting for that, 45 minutes or an hour, so that you can do it effectively. So I think that's huge. And I think sometimes it's just a little bit of empathy. We hear sometimes everyone goes, oh, I'm so busy and I'm so busy and I'm so busy. I'm like, I'm busy too. And I appreciate that we're all busy, but let's, move beyond that. Like, how can we, or how can I help you? How can we, make that a little bit lighter? If there's a way to do it, can I take something off your plate? Can we redistribute this or do something like that? We recently did, so within our organization, we have our training team who are fantastic, and they are all trained in personality dimensions, which is like, DISC and Enneagram and like all of those things. And so we all did that as a team on our comms team. And it was interesting to see how similar we are and how different we are. And so we joke about it now. I'm like, oh, that's very orange of you, right? Because it's all based on colors, right? And I'm a high blue, which is, empathetic and emotional and all of these things. And so we always joke, like, my blue side is really high today. Like, don't give me bad news and things like that. But like leaning into that as again, we sometimes joke around about it, but we also know, like, my director will come and here's all these ideas, and my other half is very, analytical and thinking, like, okay, well, what do you actually want me to do? Because I can't action 10 things. So what's the most important?
Yeah.
Just getting to know each other and really respecting the ways that we all work differently, and how you want to receive your information. Like, you might want a Teams message or a voicemail or something. I might want an email in my inbox because that's where I find my things, and just being respectful of the different ways that we all work, and we're all hardwired in different ways.
Wow. This is fascinating. And I love personality tests and communication style tests. So the colors, that's related to DISC, or was that related to Enneagram?
So these ones, this is called personality dimensions.
Oh, dimensions.
So then there's 4 colors: blue, green, gold, and orange, right? And so where do you fall within those sections? So I'm high blue and green and low gold and orange. Orange is organized, which sounds hilarious as an event planner and a wedding planner, because gold is like very organized and like all that stuff. In my work, very organized. In my personal life, I'm like, I don't need to plan every single thing, right? So yeah, whether the phrase within it is, we're all like, we have high colors, but we're all plaid, right? We all have different pieces of stuff. And it was funny, we got the results and I read it. I'm like, yeah, that tracks, because I've done DISC and I've done the other ones. I'm like, yeah, that same thing. I'm like, I'm consistent across the board.
Yeah. Well, where do you fall in DISC, if you recall?
I think I'm high I and high S, if I remember correctly. Low D, middle C-ish, I guess. It's been a while since I've gone back to that one, but
yeah, fascinating. I'm high D, which is interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I would not have pegged that, but
yeah, I know, right? I know. That's why I love these tests, and then you're right too, because sometimes it's your work life versus your personal life. And so depending on which frame of reference you're using to fill out the questionnaire, it can be different. Because I think I'm high D at work, but not in my personal life.
See, that makes sense, right? I think sometimes we all have things from both places that meld into one, but I think it's nice too that we can separate it and be like, I can be this person here, and then I can be this person on this side, and they're not competing with each other, right? You can kind of leave it there. It takes some of these things take a lot of energy and things at work. So you're like, okay, I can take that hat off and I could just leave it here and I can just relax and be this person at home or with my friends or whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah. And sometimes the ability to do that and to lean into different communication styles really speaks to your ability to adapt in different situations, which I'm sure for you is really important.
Absolutely.
So I was going to ask, okay, so here's the question. It just popped into my mind now. And, communication for some comes easier than others. And so I'd love to know, the secrets, the secret sauce, or any tips and tricks that you can give us as it relates to communication, whether that's for, for general messages or for difficult conversations, wherever you want to lean into, but we'd love to know something that we can implement based on your experience.
Communications is so broad,
I
right?
know.
And coming into it when I was writing my exam for my CMP is realizing how big, this area is and all that it encompasses. But I think that what I find in my work when people are coming to me and we're, talking about a campaign or change or whatever, I think it's just some of it is just a willingness to be open to things, right? And go against that. Well, this is the way we've always done something. I'm big on, let's try something. It might work, it might not work, but let's give it a go. So we won't know until we do that. And I think that sometimes that's part of communications is it sounds great on paper. It sounds great when you brainstorm with your team and all of these things, and then you put it out there and people are like, wah, like it just falls flat. But then come back and go, okay, well, why didn't it work? What did we miss a step? Should we have had an extra piece in there? Should we have, done a town hall with the CEO to like talk about this thing or something like that? And be willing and open and humble enough to go, I don't know all the answers, but we're going to try and see, what happens with that. And I think this environment, in this organization that I'm with now is very open to that and going like within our parameters. We're not going to do anything wild and crazy. But that's how the podcast came about, was like, okay, we're going to give you the runway and you can try it. And so I think that's the key, right? Because we all communicate differently. We all receive information in different ways. So you have to be a little open to things that might feel uncomfortable to you, but may work for other people, right? To receive that message. So you gotta, sometimes it's a little step outside of your comfort zone, I think.
Yeah. It's a little bit of adaptability, flexibility. Yeah. And how has the podcast been going?
It is my passion project. It is sometimes the project that gives me the most headache and anxiety, because it's a lot to plan a show and do those things. And when you're doing it realistically all on your own, it takes time. There's a lot of time behind it, and I get really attached to the episodes and things and putting it out there and hoping that people tune in. But we've had this podcast for about a year now, just over a year. We're about 20 episodes in, which is really fun. And I've learned so much about myself in doing it, and connecting with people in this different way, right? In a different space. And so but the feedback from the people who are tuning in is always overwhelmingly positive. Right? I will run into people in our admin office, and we'll catch up, we'll run into each other in the kitchen in the break room, and they're like, oh, I listened to this last episode and I didn't know this about this person, or I didn't know this about a program or a service that we provide. And so when I hear that stuff, that I'm like, okay, that check mark, that's what we wanted. We want you to learn about your colleagues, learn about these things that are happening, again, in a different way, right? A podcast is very intimate, right? It's two people having a conversation. And so the fact that people tune in, we certainly have some, podcast super fans who, listen to everything and comment on everything on Viva, which I think helps other people be like, oh yeah, everyone else is listening, I should listen to this too, right? You don't want to have the FOMO of missing out on the episode, right?
Yeah. Wow. And again, that's such a unique way to deliver communications. And I hadn't realized, I hadn't thought of the component where there's actual information about, programs within the organization. I thought it was more of a let's connect each other together, but I guess it's also let's connect each other and also to the organization and the resources or programs or things that are available to you. That's great.
It's been a little bit of both. We started with, at the beginning, I was, people I knew be like, hey, I'm launching a podcast. Why don't you come on with me? Right. And people, I've built up enough goodwill that people are like, okay, I'll try it. It's outside of my comfort zone, but I'll come and do it. We did a podcast about personality dimensions because it is something, we offer internally that people can take. We've had some of our interveners on who have shared stories about the people we support and their goals and achieving them. And so people learning about that, teams that work behind the scenes, we have a whole team that looks at technology and assistive devices for people. And it's very behind the scenes and quiet. So a lot of people, unless you have a person supported that happens to have been connected with an assistive device that they've helped you with, you don't know anything about them, right? And so it's like lifting that cover off of like, hey, these things happen behind the scenes, and really try to, one of my goals was to amplify new voices in the organization. Like, we have people who have been with us for 15, 20, 30 years, the voices that people are used to seeing in places and hearing on stages and things like that. And, my goal was to be like, okay, well, I want, the intervener who's been here for a year, who is just learning about this world. Or I had a beautiful conversation with someone who retired recently. She was there for 35 years. And so we talked about her journey and her career and what would she say to people coming into the field. And so we've run the spectrum of people. And my hope is that somewhere along the line, people tune into an episode and see themselves in it and also go, oh, I could do that. It's only, 10 or 15 minutes and it's not scary. And we're starting to see people go, okay, well, I might be interested. And it's not so much me having to do all the, forcing and calling in favors and bribing people with treats to be like, come on the show. Right?
Wow, what a fantastic idea. I think, from the perspective of communication and also from the perspective of engagement, I think what a fantastic initiative, and the outcome and the result that you've been able to achieve. Really kudos to you to create that and build that, and then create also the excitement and enthusiasm around it as well. So I think that's a huge win for you. And so my next question kind of leans into more of, some of your wins. And I'd just love to know if there's something that's top of mind for you, or a story that you have where, you've done something that's impacted someone else's life, someone on your team maybe, and, maybe you got some positive feedback from that. So is there anything that you can share in your experience that where you've made an impact?
I think when you first started to ask that question, the first thing I thought of was when we were putting the podcast together, right? I pitched it, it was my idea, but grounded in this space of, it's not for me, it's for all of us, right? And so how do we bring 300 people into this process? And so we did it in a couple of ways. We announced it to everyone and said, send us help us name it, help us give it a name, and that sort of thing. And that's how one of our interveners submitted, the living room as the name. And then we narrowed it down. We had people vote. So people voted on what, the name of the show was going to be. But then also coming from an accessibility perspective, we have people who work within our organization who are members of the deaf community. And so we were trying to be very conscious of, okay, well, we're going to bring in this medium that is traditionally audio. And so how do we bring them into this? And of course, when you Google search it, the Google tells you, oh, well, just put up a transcript of your podcast. I'm going, well, that's not very, it's not engaging. It's not going to bring you into it if you're just going to sit there and read it. And at that time, we hadn't thought about video podcasts. We were just thinking audio. So what we did was but in conversation, we brought a few of them into sort of a think tank and said, how can we do this and make sure we're as inclusive as possible because we don't want anyone to feel left out, and had some great conversations with them. And, we came up with this idea of, well, we could put it on YouTube. And then, we had to go find a platform where we could make the closed captions as accurate as possible. Like, sometimes when you put them on and they're not always entirely correct, you don't get that thing like when you do it yourself on YouTube. So now that's part of my editing process, is to go through that whole transcript and make sure that, it's picked up words correctly, they're spelled correctly, like the organization's name is spelled correctly, so that, people can come into this space. And you could put YouTube on and put your headphones in and, be working and walking around, or you can sit and, watch the video and watch it with the closed captions. And then we also had one of our employees on in September for International Week of Deaf People. She is deaf, and she came on with an interpreter, and we did a whole podcast about International Week of Deaf People and had a conversation about it. And so I think those are the things I'm really proud of, is just how we're bringing our people into it, so that it doesn't feel like, oh, this is Amy's podcast and this is her thing. Like, it is our thing, and bringing people in. And we're always asking for, who do you want to hear from? Who should we talk to? What do you want to know more about? I'm hoping that over the summer, we're going to do a little revamp of this studio space, and ask people like to send in artwork. I'd love to find someone in our organization who maybe like records music and will like record us a new like intro music or something like that. Just more ways we can bring people into it. I'd love to turn over the mic to people, be like, have two other people interview each other, right? And I'm just going to produce in the background. So I think it's got some really interesting places it can go, but I'm really proud of the fact that we've tried to bring other people into it as much as possible.
Wow. Thank you for that. I think that really speaks to, your approach to engaging folks that are in different geographical locations, bringing them into the process at every point, not just for the podcast. It's in the naming convention and artwork and music and all these sorts of ways where you can lean on the different skills and just get people interested and bought into this process that ultimately benefits them. So I think that's such a fantastic initiative. So I'm so glad that we were able to hear that and learn more about it. And lastly, I think we'd love to know about you, and what are you driven by, Amy?
I think I am driven by that people connection, right? If you go back to wedding planning and all of those things, it's always been about connecting with people and, bringing that into sort of the everyday. Like if I have a day or two when I haven't had a meeting or a conversation with people, I get a little stir crazy. My partner's like, are you okay? I'm like, I haven't talked to anyone all day. So I'm very social in that way, but in that connection space. And so how do we connect people together, connect people to the work of the organization, to, whatever that might look like. I love networking and going and doing all of those things. So when I can pop, a networking event into my calendar, I'm like, sign me up. I want to go. I'm ready, kind of thing. So I think just that, and getting to know people, because there's so many amazing stories. What I love about the podcast is just getting to talk to people, and even coming on here and talking to you and just connecting and learning about other things. I'm very naturally curious that way. So I think that's what drives me in my work and my purpose, I would say.
Yeah, I feel that very, very deeply. An example of that is how we met. We met at a trade show, and I think the connection was so genuine right away. And I'm like, this is going to be a great conversation on the podcast. And, in our email exchange back and forth, I quickly read over them before hopping on today. And it was just like these little moments of connection, and in the book and the photos of the eagles that you saw, and all these really cool things. So I can absolutely see that you are a people connector. So today has been wonderful to have you on the podcast. I'm so glad you joined us. And I'd love to know, and I'd love to have our listeners know where they can find you if they'd like to get connected.
I think the best way to connect is how we connected afterwards too on LinkedIn, connecting there and sending a request. I'm always happy to, if there's anyone tuning in that's thinking about starting a podcast for employee engagement and having those conversations, or again, just internal comms and connecting with people, LinkedIn is a great place to find me.
Fantastic. Okay, so make sure you get connected with Amy Stevenson on LinkedIn. Amy, thank you so very much for joining us on the podcast today and for sharing a little bit of insight into your background, your experience, and what you've got going on at Deafblind Ontario and with the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for tuning in to the What Are You Driven By podcast. We hope that you'll join us next time for another incredible leadership story. Make sure you subscribe and connect with us online at Driven by Co. Till then, stay driven.